They laughed when he built it, openly, belligerently, like drunk men throwing chairs at a saloon fire. Some wouldn't even walk by it without snorting. It wasn't just ugly, it was offensive to every man who'd ever fashioned something with pride and hammer. A pile of crooked timbers nailed into a skeletal tower, leaning wrong against the horizon like it had been dropped from the sky and stuck where it landed. The planks didn't match, the steps creaked even when no one touched them, and the whole thing looked more like a lopsided coffin than a deer stand. But Silas Kane built it anyway. He hammered through dusk and nailed by lantern light. Some nights he coughed until morning from the sawdust in his lungs. He hauled the rotten boards up from the dump behind the general store and reshaped them until they almost behaved. There were no deer in sight most days, and no one in their right mind thought that Shaq would spot anything worth shooting. But Silas didn't say much. He just kept building. They called him Shaky Silas, said he had tremors in his hands and ghosts in his attic. They said he'd gone strange since his wife died, and the war turned his brother to bones on some distant muddy field. They said his brain had warped like waterlogged lumber, and when he nailed the crooked window shut at the top and said it was good enough for watching, the Cowboys hollered so hard some near fell off their horses. It wasn't even hunting season. What the hell was Silas watching? That was what no one asked, because deep down, every man who mocked him knew the shape of unease. The cattle had been skittish, dogs barked at the wind, and old Buck Farley, half-drunk prophet of bad omens, kept muttering about men seen riding low by the arroyos at night, not herding, not traveling, just watching. But laughter was easier, safer, until the first dog turned up skinned, until a mare foaled early and her throat was slit before dawn, until the sheriff's boy, barely 12, swore on his mother's grave he saw a shape crawling belly low through the brush behind the mercantile, eyes like flint in the moonlight, dragging something long and bladed behind it. Still, no one looked towards Silas's tower, not until the bell rang. He rigged a bell to that deer stand, used parts of his old wedding dinnerware, and a mess of copper wire twisted through rusted nails. When it rang, it wasn't a clean chime. It was a bone-deep clatter like iron shaking in the ribcage of God. It rang at 2:17 in the morning, and no one forgot the sound. Sheriff Harland was first out of bed. He hadn't touched liquor in 2 years, but stumbled like a man half drunk as he grabbed his rifle and burst out the door in his long johns. Mrs. McCreary saw him through the curtains and did the same. Her rifle was older than sin, but she kept it oiled. Within 4 minutes, 7 more men were awake. In 10, 17, and by the time they reached the edge of the North Ridge where Silas's ugly tower leaned like a warning stake in the dark, they saw the oil lamp swinging at the top and the shadow of Silas's body pointing. He wasn't waving, he wasn't panicked, he was still, focused. He pointed toward the ridge beyond the dried creek bed, the one no one had ridden past in months, and they saw them. Riders, maybe a dozen, maybe more, just shapes in the night with no lanterns, moving low, slow, like they already knew the town's habits, like they already smelled the sleep in its windows and the warmth of its stoves. But Silas saw them first, and because of that, so did everyone else. "Get behind the church," Harland hissed. "Wake the preacher. Tell him to start the bell." He didn't need to say more. The townsfolk scattered into practiced motion. They hadn't had cause to drill like this since the drought riots 8 years ago, but they remembered how. Doors slammed, lights flared behind shuttered windows, and the old bell tower creaked alive for the first time in seasons. The raiders paused when they heard it, briefly, and then they charged. But the town was ready. Harlan posted men along the fence line and 2 sharpshooters on the grain roof. Buck Farley, old fool or not, took up a perch by the tannery with a scattergun and a look in his eye that said he'd finally met the apocalypse he'd always predicted. They came fast, but they didn't come clean. Not like bandits, not like desperate men. These were coordinated. No whooping, no warning shots. They wore cloth masks and rode in formation. And the worst part was, they didn't all come from the north. Silas rang the bell again, then again, because while the riders from the ridge were the first wave, 2 more came from the east and the southwest. They tried to pin the town in, flush it like rabbits from a thicket, but Silas saw it all. From that ugly perch, that tower every man had mocked now stood like a god's eye over the town, and he moved inside it like a conductor at the heart of a symphony of defense. Each time he rang that twisted bell and pointed, Harland repositioned men. Each time they were waiting before the raiders rounded the hill. The fight was short, blood was spilled, but not as much as it should have been. Silas's eyes bought them minutes, and minutes bought them lives. By dawn, 4 of the raiders lay face down in the dirt. 3 were captured. 1 was barely 18. He cried when they tied his hands, said he was paid in silver just to ride and cut lantern lines. Never knew it was a real town, never knew folks lived here with babies and hymn books and old men who still shined their boots on Sundays. He pointed west, toward the borderland, said that's where the money came from. Nobody laughed that morning. The ugly deer stand was still leaning, still crooked, but men stopped calling it that. They called it the watch post now, and they came to Silas's porch one by one that day, hats in hand, eyes down, offering boards, hammer nails, and silence. But Silas didn't come down, didn't speak much. He just sat up there, eyes on the ridge, hands steady, watching, because not all the riders were caught, and Silas didn't believe in waiting for grief to knock twice. The sun didn't rise that morning so much as creep, faint and reluctant behind a sky that looked like torn wool, smeared with low ash clouds and the bruised yellows of spent gunpowder. The town, for all its narrow salvation, looked like something that had survived a flood and hadn't dried yet. Smoke curled where it shouldn't, shutters hung at angles. One chicken wandered across Main Street, dragging a length of wire fence from its ankle. And the quiet wasn't peace, it was aftermath, that breathless stillness between the scream and the sob. Sheriff Harland walked it slowly, rifle at his side, head down, but his eyes moved like they'd grown teeth. He saw everything, not just bloodstains and boot tracks, but what wasn't there. A loose hinge on the post office door, pulled clean, rope cuts in the alley behind the tavern, where someone had tied a horse in a hurry, mud on the farrier's roof. None of it belonged. All of it meant something. By the time he made it to Silas's tower, the morning had gone grey and sullen. Silas hadn't moved. He was still in that slanted window, hunched like a crow, elbow on the sill, eyes hollow from a night that hadn't ended yet. The bell rope dangled near his wrist, frayed and blackened from overuse. "You see any more?" Harland asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the tree line again, scanning like a man looking for the breath he lost a decade ago. Finally, he said, "One of 'em lit a signal fire, small, covered fast, but I saw the smoke. Drifted up real thin." Harland followed his gaze. "You sure?" Silas blinked once, slow. "I know smoke when I see it, Harland." They stood in it a moment longer. Wind touched the grass in shivers, but there was no sound, no birds, not even crows. Then Silas added, almost too low to hear, "We didn't win." Harland's jaw worked, chewing on the words before they could become lies. "We're still here, not the same thing." And Silas was right. The town had survived, but it hadn't endured without cost. Amos Dyer, who'd once played the fiddle so sweet it made old women cry, was dead behind the wheelwright's barn. Maud from the boarding house was missing. They found a trail of blood down behind her chicken coop, but nothing else. And young Eli Worsham had a bullet hole through his calf and fever climbing already. But worse than the casualties was the question, who sent them, and why? The captured riders didn't offer much. One tried to hang himself with his own belt before they cut him down. Another spit blood and said he was promised his debt cleared if he made a show of fright. None of them had names they were willing to share. None of them spoke of a leader, but one had a piece of parchment in his saddlebag, rolled tight, sealed with wax that bore a broken stamp no one in town recognized. A hawk eating a snake. The note was brief. "More come with the thaw." Harland gathered the men that evening, not just the fighters, everyone. They stood in a semicircle under the half-collapsed awning behind the general store, lanterns swinging in the stiffening wind. "I ain't gonna dress this up," Harland said. "They're coming back. More of 'em. Maybe smarter, maybe not." Murmurs rose. One man spoke. "Why? We got nothing. No mine, no gold, no train line." But that wasn't true. Not really. "We have geography," Silas rasped. He stepped out from the shadow beside the store, the first time he'd come down from the tower all day. His coat hung off him like dead weight. He looked older than he had before the raid, like the night had stolen years. But his eyes were sharp. "We sit between the hills and the water. They want passage, or staging ground, or maybe just proof they can wipe something off the map and no one'll come check." No one argued, because they all knew there wasn't another town within 2 days' ride. No telegraph, no army, no sheriff bigger than Harland. If these men came back with more force, they could erase the town and be halfway to the border before anyone noticed. "They'll scout first," Silas went on. "Test our nerves. Maybe pick off folk that stray too far. They'll want to know if last night was luck or strength." Buck Farley stepped forward, lips pale. "Then we show 'em strength." But Silas shook his head. "No. We show 'em nothing." That night, Silas did something no one expected. He tore down the top of the deer stand. People screamed at him, literally shouted as he yanked free the beams he'd worked so long to place. They didn't understand. They thought he was breaking the one thing that saved them. But he wasn't destroying it. He was hiding it. He worked all night. And by morning the tower looked like it had collapsed from age and storm. The top was gone. The base was covered in tarps, dragged from the tannery and soaked in dust. From a distance it looked like a ruin, no use to man or beast. But inside, Silas had rebuilt. The new watchpost was smaller, sunk into the earth where he'd dug a hollow beneath the old base. The slit he watched through now was lower, narrow as a rifle barrel. It looked out across the creek and into the hills, and he ran 2 long copper wires through the dirt. connected them to a crude buzzer made from the same scraps that powered his old bell. No sound now, no light, just a faint hum in Harlan's pocket when Silas pressed the switch. They practiced drills every day, quiet ones. Kids learned to pack in under 5 minutes. Families knew where to run. Harlan showed 2 women how to shoot, and Silas taught a boy how to wind the bell rope in case he was ever gone. Then one morning, the humming started. Short, then long, pause, then long again, the signal. Harlan was mid-step behind the saloon when it buzzed. He stopped breathing, touched the wire under his shirt. 2 tugs, 1 pause. That meant west side. Another buzz, south fence, and then a third, east trail. They were being encircled again, but Silas had eyes, and this time he had traps, not spikes or pits, nothing crude. No, Silas had used his nights to wire trip lines through choke points and tie cans of nails to trees in the far woods. If one moved, the town would hear it, and they did. The clatter of metal on metal rang like a thunderclap, and within seconds, Harlan had 20 men spread in a defensive arc. The raiders broke formation. They didn't expect preparation, but they didn't retreat either. They surged forward, not as riders, but on foot, from shadows, using the tall grass like a veil. They didn't scream, they didn't speak. It was eerie, like fighting ghosts. But the town held. Silas called every motion. His wire signals never ceased. Harlan learned to read them like letters. Buzz buzz meant left flank. Buzz long meant north woods. Buzz alone meant wait. Pause, then strike. The raiders fell one by one, not because the town was stronger, but because it was watched. And there is nothing more powerful than being seen before you're ready. By the time the dust settled, 5 more raiders lay dead. 2 were captured, though one had a knife hidden in his boot and killed himself before he could be questioned. The other was half mad, muttering in a tongue no one recognized. They kept him locked in the schoolhouse with a guard. He scratched the hawk-eating snake symbol into the floor over and over with his nails. Silas didn't sleep that night. Neither did the town. They didn't win. They survived. And Silas sat alone in the dark of that sunken tower, ears pressed to the soil like he was listening for something deeper than hoofbeats, something old, something moving beneath the land itself. Because he knew this wasn't over, and something worse was coming. They began finding the tokens the next morning, little things carved from bone, tucked where they didn't belong. One was hanging from the bell pull outside the chapel, no bigger than a thumb, shaped like a screaming face with its mouth sewn shut. Another was nailed to the post outside the saloon. 2 fingers bound together by horsehair, etched with 3 slashes. The last was left inside the empty crib of Martha Grady's twins. She didn't scream when she found it. She just stood there, holding the thing, a small figurine with no eyes, no feet, and a hole through its chest, until her husband took it from her hands and burned it in the stove. The town didn't sleep again that week, not even the babies. They tried to convince themselves it was just tactics, psychological warfare. Harlan even said so out loud, twice, maybe 3 times, loudly, but his voice never carried right after that. Something in the wind swallowed it. Silas, however, wasn't surprised. He hadn't come down from the sunken watch post since the second raid. He was eating cold biscuits and rainwater now, sleeping in half-hour shifts, knees tucked to his chest to fit in the crawl space. His hands were always dirty. He didn't shave, didn't speak unless he had to. But his eyes, those stayed sharp. He told Harlan the carvings meant they were being studied, watched, not for weakness but for rhythm, routine. The first attacks had been trials, he said, probes. This was something else, psychological bleed. The attackers didn't want to win through blood, not entirely. They wanted the town brittle, hollowed out before the real strike. "Why us?" Harlan muttered, sitting on the edge of the well, polishing his father's old Colt with a rag that didn't help. Silas, overhead, answered flatly, "Because we're alone." That was the truth. The town, no one even called it by its full name anymore, just the town, wasn't on any important map. The rail had skipped it years back. The old trade route veered off to the south now. Even the telegraph wire ended 20 miles east, near a ghost depot no one had manned since the mine dried up. There was no help coming, and the raiders knew it. Silas's ugly tower, now invisible from afar, became the center of everything. At night, he'd map flickers of movement with chalk. He tracked stars, not for beauty, but for timing. He used the sway of trees to judge approach. His wires buzzed constantly, and the men on patrol learned to wait for his signals before moving, before firing, even before thinking. But it wasn't enough, because they kept coming, not in waves now, not even in full groups, just 1 or 2 shapes at a time, seen, then gone, a horse print in the mud where no rider should have been, a knocked-over barrel with claw marks, Though what kind of horseman used claws, nobody wanted to guess. One night, Silas spotted a lantern light bobbing slowly through the cottonwoods. He didn't signal. He climbed down for the first time in days and went out alone. Harlan saw him leave and tried to follow, but Silas motioned once, flat palm, and the sheriff froze. Something about the way he moved, the way he melted into the dark, said this was something different, something old. Silas came back an hour later with blood on his boots and a look that made the children stop talking for the rest of the day. He didn't say what he'd found, only that they needed to dig. The ground behind the tannery was hard and filled with roots, but they dug anyway. 6 men working through sun and sweat and silence until the shovels struck something that wasn't rock. A pit, shallow, fresh. 7 bodies. 3 were men from the raiding parties, dressed like shadows, gear stamped with that cursed hawk and snake sigil, but 4 weren't. 2 were townsfolk no one realized had gone missing. Old Nate Klein and his boy Felix, who'd gone out to check their traps 3 days ago. The other 2, no one could identify, but they weren't raiders. They were scouts. That much was clear. Each had a map carved into leather, showing the town and the surrounding valley. One even had a locket inside his shirt with a woman's picture. Whoever he was, he'd been sent ahead long before the attacks began. They've been planning this for months, Silas said that night. Maybe longer. The mood shifted after that. Not panic. Something worse. Acceptance. The town realized this wasn't a wave. It was a flood. And you don't win against floods. You brace. You survive, or you drown. Silas began building again. Not the tower, it was as built as it needed to be, but tunnels, small ones, shallow, connecting the schoolhouse to the store to the smithy. Crawl tunnels, just wide enough for a child or a desperate man. He had Harland ration nails. He had the seamstress sew padded door flaps to muffle gunshots. He taught the kids how to reload rifles by touch. Then came the night no one expected. The wind died, completely. Not even a rustle. The air felt thick, like molasses over teeth. People stopped in their tracks. Chickens didn't cluck. Dogs whined, but no louder than a breath. Silas climbed the tower, and there they were. Not riders, marchers, on foot, silent, moving with military precision, spread in a crescent across the valley. Black shapes in rows. No torches, no horses, just the faint sound of their steps on frostbitten grass. Harlan joined him in the tower. 50, he whispered. More, Silas said. At least 70. We can't stop that many. No, Silas agreed, but we can slow them. The next hour moved in blur. Harland rang the silent bell system, a new invention, wired to buzz inside certain homes. Families evacuated to root cellars and tunnel junctions. The few men still able to fight, only 13, took positions as directed by Silas's hand-drawn maps. The preacher loaded pistols for the first time in 20 years, and Silas lit the decoys. 5 lanterns set out on poles, mimicking sentries. Dummies dressed in old clothes with broomstick rifles. Even from a distance, it'd confuse any formation, make them believe more men stood guard. Then came the first contact. A whistle, not human, more like wind through bone. Then gunfire, not from the town, from them, wild and unfocused. They weren't aiming to kill, they were forcing a response. Harland held his men. Silas gave the sign. Wait. Then, at the exact moment they crested the southern fence, fire, not bullets, flame. Silas had poured lamp oil through shallow trenches earlier that week. They ignited now like the finger of God, forming a wall of heat that split the marchers in 2. They didn't scream, not one. They adjusted, moved around. But Silas had expected that too. Harlan's group opened fire, and the sharp noise split the night like bones breaking underfoot. The marchers staggered. 3 fell, but more came. Too many. They reached the fence. Silas rang the panic signal. 3 buzzes. Long, short. Harland pulled back. The schoolhouse was overrun. The general's store breached. Smoke rose fast. Then came the worst part, the screaming, not of townsfolk, of the raiders. One was caught in a trap near the smithy. When they found him, he wasn't shouting for help. He was praying to something. Silas looked into his eyes and saw madness, not fury, faith. That's when it clicked. This isn't conquest, Silas whispered. It's a ritual. Harlan didn't understand at first, but he saw what Silas meant soon enough, because in the middle of the chaos, in the courtyard near the chapel, 5 of the raiders fell to their knees and began chanting, low, rhythmic, words no one knew, and the ground began to hum, not tremble, hum, a sound like bees in a coffin. Then the air split, not with light, but with darkness. A cold shadow stretched from nowhere, and Silas screamed something no one heard. He fired at the ground, at the shadow, and it stopped. Just like that. Gone. The chant broke. The men collapsed. Whatever they had tried to summon or unleash had failed, maybe just barely, but the price was high. 4 townsfolk dead, 2 children missing, half the homes destroyed or smoking, and Silas Kane, was bleeding from both ears. Still they lived, and when dawn rose, they found the raiders had fled, left everything behind, even their dead, even their symbols, even that twisted parchment with the hawk and snake. But the ground stayed stained, and Silas knew they weren't done. The dawn after the third assault didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like someone had painted the sky with lie, bleached, raw, poisonous in its silence. Nothing moved, not the chickens, not the leaves, not the wind. It was the kind of morning that made you feel like the world was holding its breath before something worse. The kind of silence that didn't settle on your skin but crawled under it. The townsfolk didn't gather. There was nothing left to say. They moved like ghosts across the ash of their own homesteads, dragging wood, bucketing water, boarding windows that wouldn't matter next time. Harland had blood on his sleeve and a broken toe. He didn't limp, he didn't curse. He just tied a strip of shirt around it and got back to boarding up the post office. Martha Grady's eyes had gone sunken since the attack. Her twins hadn't been found. Not a trace, not a single print. The crib still sat open, clean, untouched. Silas Kane hadn't spoken in 2 days. He sat in the rebuilt watchpost, what was now more burrow than tower, motionless except for his fingers, which kept tightening the same wire over and over again. He had the look of a man rewinding time by muscle memory, pale, gaunt, sleepless. That night, when Harland brought him a slice of cornbread, Silas finally spoke. 3 words. "They're not gone." Harland paused, watching the man he used to think was broken now, holding the last threads of the town together. "We saw them flee," he said. "They left their dead, their things. They left their ritual," Silas said, voice brittle as paper. "That wasn't a retreat. It was a stall." Harland didn't understand at first, until he found the second pit. It was under the chapel. No one even thought to check there until little Maggie Boyle said she heard breathing in the floorboards. Harland pried them up himself. What he saw changed his face forever. It wasn't just a hole, it was carved, the shape of a circle, etched with crude symbols, all surrounding a raised stone at the center, black and porous like volcanic glass, humming faintly with a sound you didn't hear but felt in your ribs. And there was blood, not just dried, but fresh, still warm. It hadn't been there yesterday. Harland called Silas down from the tower. When he saw it, Silas whispered a word no one caught. He knelt beside the stone and ran one hand over the edge, his fingertips flinching like they'd brushed flame. "This ain't war," he said. "It's invitation." "What do you mean? They're not just killing, they're opening." Harland stared at him. "Opening what?" Silas looked back, eyes red, voice cracking. "Whatever's been waiting." He explained it that night, what little he knew. Said he'd heard tales when he was young, from the old Apache tracker, who used to trade pelts for glass beads, and once told Silas never to step near the northern ridge during certain moons. Said there were holes in the world, thin spots, where something ancient pushed from the other side. Not demons, not gods, something older than names. He said men could find those holes and make them wider. "Some don't want land or loot," Silas said. "They want to see what happens when the world breaks." The town didn't know what to do with that. Some wept, some fled. The Harlow family packed a wagon that night and rolled west. They never made it to the next valley. Their horses were found the next day, still yoked, throats cut, but no bodies, no wagon, just blood tracks leading back toward the chapel. By the 3rd day, only 40 townsfolk remained, half of them children, 5 men still able to hold a rifle. Harland didn't eat, Silas didn't sleep. The preacher sat in the bell tower, reciting psalms over and over with a voice so dry it cracked. Then the sky changed, not the weather, the sky itself. Colors began bleeding in ways they shouldn't. At dusk, the horizon pulsed red, then violet, then a green so sickly it made folks retch just looking. Stars disappeared, then came back, then twitched in ways that defied every chart ever drawn. And Silas Kane's wires buzzed, but not from him, from nowhere. The line hissed and sparked like something inside it was breathing. The tower lanterns flickered out, and deep below the church, that black stone began humming louder. They weren't waiting anymore, they were coming. That night, Silas did something no one expected. He told Harland the truth. "It was never about deer," he said. "What?" "The tower. I never built it to hunt." Harland blinked, confused. Silas's face stayed still. 3 years ago, I found a path in the hills. Something wrong about it. Trees that bled sap too thick. Birds that flew backward. I followed it, found a rock like the one under the chapel, only smaller. I touched it, felt something. Felt what? Curiosity. From the other side. Silas wiped his eyes. So I built a place to watch. I thought, maybe if I saw it early enough I could stop it. He smiled then, a bitter, hollow thing. But I was too late. Harland didn't know what to say, so Silas kept talking. I built the tower ugly on purpose, to push people away, to keep them from asking questions. I thought if I could keep quiet, if I could bear the ridicule, I could see it before it saw us. He looked back out the slit window. But it always saw us. That night the ground cracked, not split, cracked, like something beneath had shifted in its sleep and stretched the earth's skin too far. A sound like bones dislocating rolled through the valley. Then came the whisper. Everyone heard it. It came from nowhere, from inside, a voice in each skull, speaking in a language that had no words but still meant something. Mothers clutched their babies. Dogs howled until their throats tore. And at the center of it all, Silas's watch post buzzed, not in signal. In pain, the wire snapped, sparks flew, the whole thing lit up like flint in dry grass. Silas dove from the opening, just as the roof blew off, not from explosion but pressure, like something pushing up from beneath. The town gathered around him. Harlan tried to speak. Silas stood, covered in soot, eyes wide. "It's happening." "What is?" "They're done with prayers." A deep rumble shook the church. The preacher screamed as the bell tower leaned forward, then snapped at its base, crashing into the street like a hammer from heaven. Then silence again, until the wind returned. But it wasn't wind, it was breathing. One breath, long, drawn, echoing through the hollow earth like lungs the size of mountains. Silas turned to Harlan. "One last thing," he said. "What?" "We have to bury the stone." Harlan blinked. "The one under the church?" Silas nodded. "With what?" "Faith." Harlan hesitated, then said, "We ain't got much of that left." Silas looked at the children huddled in the corner of the square. "That's enough." And he moved, not like a man, like a storm, ripped open his old satchel, pulled out jars of lye, fire powder, black sand he'd never explained before. He stuffed them into a crate, wrapped it in oilcloth, tied it with wire, and carried it toward the chapel. Harlan followed, rifle in hand. The sky pulsed again. The chapel doors opened by themselves. Inside, the pews were turned. The floorboards curled upward like warped tongues. The stone in the pit now glowed, not with light but with hunger. Silas stood at the edge, then looked back. "This is gonna cost me," he said. "All of me." Harlan opened his mouth. "Don't say a word," Silas added. "Just build another, if this don't work." And he jumped, crate and all, down into the pit. The earth roared, the chapel cracked, and a blast of black fire shot through the steeple. It didn't burn, it erased. When it cleared, the stone was gone. Silas was gone, and for the first time in weeks, the sky went quiet. But Harlan didn't sleep that night, because when he walked past what was left of the watchpost, he saw something new, a figure, not moving, not alive, just standing there, made of twisted timber, crooked, silent, staring at the chapel, as if watching. Still, they didn't rebuild the chapel. No one even touched the ruins. The crater where the altar had been, where Silas had vanished with the crate, was filled with rubble and prayer and silence. It didn't smoke. It didn't glow, it simply remained, a scar in the dirt, like the world had blinked and flinched at the same time. Afterward, nobody called it a miracle, not out loud, but everyone treated the ground around it like it might bite if disturbed. Even the preacher, who once gave sermons with both hands raised and fire in his belly, now walked barefoot past the place and mumbled apologies to no one in particular. A week passed, then another, and still the town stood. No more tokens, no more scouts, no more buzzing from unseen wires. But the fear didn't go away, not completely, not like it had before. It clung to the walls. People still whispered late at night, still checked under beds and behind doors, still looked over their shoulders even when they were alone, because they remembered not just what they saw, but what they almost saw, what tried to come through, and what Silas stopped. He was gone, that much was certain. They searched for days, dug through what was left of the stone, sifted ashes, checked every tunnel, every crawl space, but there was no body, no bones, just one boot, burnt at the sole, sitting upright beside a length of snapped wire and a single copper nail bent into the shape of a cross. Harlan took that nail and wore it around his neck from then on, not because he thought it gave him protection, but because it reminded him that some people build ugly things that save others anyway. They held a service for Silas. Short, no eulogies, just the preacher, shaking, holding a piece of that tower and whispering. He watched when no one else would. Then they buried the tower's remains, not out of shame but respect, folded each timber with care, planted wildflowers over the spot, and after that they did what towns always do. They tried to live. The Grady twins were never found. Neither was the Harlow family. But others stayed, rebuilt, reinforced. Windows were bricked. Tunnels expanded. The schoolhouse was made into a barracks. Children were taught to shoot as well as spell. The word watch became sacred. They never saw the raiders again, never heard from the ones who survived. The strange sigils stopped appearing. No more pit-borne stones, no more chants. But they knew. It wasn't over. It was quiet, which is not the same as peace. Harlan took to walking every morning. Same route, same pace, watching the hills. He'd stop at the ruins of Silas's post, just a low patch of grass now, and tip his hat. He never spoke, just stood there. Once, he thought he saw a shape on the ridge, small, still. But when he blinked, it was gone. 2 months after the last attack, a traveler came through, said he was heading to Frisco, heard there'd been trouble here once. Harlan said yes, but no more. The traveler nodded, stayed the night. He left before dawn, didn't take his boots, left them standing in the road, pointed toward the chapel. Inside one was a piece of carved bone, same kind they'd found weeks before, but this one was different. It had a message scratched into the side. We tried again. It saw us. Harlan didn't show the others. He took it behind the old stable and burned it, but he didn't sleep that night. That week he called a meeting. Only 10 showed up. That was enough. He cleared his throat. "I'm building a new tower," he said. They stared. No one spoke. Then one man, Elias Boone, stood. The blacksmith's boy, grown tall and quiet since his pa died in the second raid. He said, "Where?" Harlan looked at the horizon. Same spot, North Ridge. "Why?" another asked. Harlan's voice cracked a little. "'Cause it worked. They built it. Not the same way Silas had. Not crooked, not hidden. This one was taller, stronger, reinforced with iron at the joints. A stairwell that spiraled up, open to the air, with a bell at the top that rang clean and true when the wind caught it just right. They didn't call it a deer stand. They didn't even call it a watchtower. They called it the Eye, and they never let it sit empty. Every night someone took a shift. Young or old, didn't matter. And they were trained not just to look, but to listen, to feel, to wait. Because what Silas Kane gave them wasn't just a warning. It was a way to survive. Years passed. Children grew. The town got smaller. Not because of death, but because people learned how to stay quiet, how to live in the hush of land that still remembered fire. The Eye remained. One night a boy named Thomas, barely 12, rang the bell. He said he saw riders in the distance. Just 3, but they weren't moving, just sitting their horses on the far hill, watching. Harlan climbed up himself, looked, then looked again. No horses, no riders, just 3 stumps. He nodded once and said nothing. Thomas asked if he was wrong. Harlan told him the truth. "You were right." The next day, he added a second bell to the tower, and the boy took the next night's shift. Decades later, a stranger came riding up the old trail, gray in his beard, dust on his coat, said he'd heard about a place where something terrible tried to come through once and didn't make it, said he wanted to see where it happened. Harlan was old then, eyes cloudy, hands shaking, but he walked the man to the chapel ruins, showed him the crater. The stranger stood silent a long time, then asked, "How'd you stop it?" Harlan nodded toward the ridge. "Someone saw it first." "And what happened to him?" Harlan smiled, the saddest smile a man can give. "He never stopped looking, and when the wind blew through the grass just right, you could still hear the faintest sound of wire buzzing under the soil, still watching, still waiting. And the town, small as it was, kept living, because one man built something ugly and saw what others couldn't and never looked away.